The cow is of the bovine ilk. One end is moo, the other is milk. The cow, Ogden Nash. This is AMI Audiobook Review. I'm your host, Jacob Szymanski. April is Poetry Month, so let's recognize it with someone who not only appreciates poetry, but can teach us how to appreciate it. Danielle McLaughlin is a regular contributor to the show, and we're always happy to have her on. And Danielle, you were the one that gave us that poem off the start about the bovine ilk. What is this poem? What did you just make me read?
I made you read for people who say they don't really like poetry, I never believe them. And all you have to do is read some silly poetry or some childhood poems to get yourself started, and you'll start realizing that not only do you actually like it, it's funny in some parts, and it's somewhat addictive. So I had to give you Ogden Nash to start with.
Let me read it again.
Yes,
The
please.
cow is of the bovine ilk. One end is moo, the other milk.
There you go.
That that that's just a weird flowery description of a cow,
Yes.
which brings me to something I wanted to bring up right off the top. What's the difference between a paragraph that's written in a flowery way and poetry with a capital P?
Well, it's not always easy to tell. Many poems, though not all, have a specific structure. So you've heard of sonnets, you've heard of limericks. Um, those are the kinds of poems that people often think of because they know that they have a very specific structure. We know
Mm.
haiku has a very specific structure, but there are people who write poetic prose and people who write prose like poems. So I think that there's a shady line between the two of them, and it's almost like saying, well, poetry is written by poets and prose by other sorts of writers. But I think you get to say what you have written. Is it a poem? If you say it's a poem, I don't think anybody's allowed to tell you it's not.
And poetry's been around for ages too. Like we've had um what do you call them? Poets laureate
Poets
for
laureate. That's right.
laureate for centuries, right? Like
Yeah.
first of all, what is a poet laureate?
A poet laureate, it's an appointed position, and many governments, both municipal and federal, as well as universities and other places, have somebody who they want to honor because of the poetry they've written, and they give them a job. And the poet laureate, for example, in England, John Dryden, I think, was the first of the English poets laureate, are paid a stipend, and while they're being paid, they're expected to produce poetry for specific occasions. So, for example, the coronation of a king.
That's
They
awesome.
Yeah, it's cool. And for other occasions, and sometimes they just will spontaneously create poetry that they want the nation or the city. Toronto has a poet laureate. We have a poet laureate of Parliament in Ottawa. So it's a very specific job. Doesn't pay a hell of a lot, mind you, but it used to. And the thing is that the poet laureate in England um, was paid a certain amount of money, and they still get the same amount of money now. So what looked really great in 1700, it doesn't look quite as great now. Of course,
Good lord. So it wasn't indexed with inflation, is what you're
not
saying.
even a little bit, not even a little bit, but it did include what was called a butt of sack. What the hell is that? A butt of sack is a very, very large quantity of alcohol like sherry. They would. I think that they were considered to be likely to be drinkers. So a poet laureate would have enough money to barely live on, and early on it was actually quite a lot, but and then they would be expected to drink, and that was what they uh, could get in as a kind of honorary way of making their way
Wow.
through. Yeah,
Well, the sherry is just to whet their wits. Where
that's
would you
it.
expect them to write poetry without something to
You have to have
stimulate a little
something
bit?
there, right?
So poetry is I think there's a notion, and I've definitely fallen into this, that it's a little bit like inaccessible to anyone who's not an English literature major. Like, what's your sales pitch for poetry for the average common man, the peasant?
Okay. Well, I think that it can be inaccessible or it can be completely accessible. And if you start by looking at poetry written specifically for children, which I'm hopeful that many children these days are still exposed at a very early age to poetry, they're going to love the, in some cases, sing song nature. So I'm going to read for you, if I may,
Yeah,
a
please.
poem that I loved when I was 4, maybe? Or anyway, very young. And this was a poem that has a form to it that children really latch onto. It's called Disobedience, and it's written by A. Milne, who wrote the Winnie the Pooh series, and it's in his book When We Were Very Young. So it's written for very young children. James Morrison, Weatherby George Dupree, took great care of his mother, though he was only 3. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." James Morrison's mother put on a golden gown. James Morrison's mother drove to the end of the town. James Morrison's mother said to herself, said she, "I can get right down to the end of town and be back in time for tea." King John put up a notice. Lost or stolen or strayed, James Morrison's mother seems to have been mislaid. Last seen wandering vaguely, quite of her own accord, she tried to get down to the end of the town. 40 shillings reward. James Morrison, commonly known as Jim, told his other relations not to go blaming him. James said to his mother, "Mother," he said he, "you must never go down to the end of the town without consulting me." James Morrison's mother hasn't been heard of since. King James said he was sorry. So did the king and the prince. King John, somebody told me, said to a man he knew, "If people go down to the end of the town, well, what can anyone do?" JJMMWG Dupuy took great care of his M, though he was only 3. JJ said to his M, said he, "You must never go down to the end of the town if you don't go down with me." Now, can you imagine a child having fun filling in the blanks in that last verse where they know what's coming and they just say it along with the person reading to them?
It's so rhythmic.
Right.
I can imagine somebody like putting like a beat behind it.
Exactly. Yeah. So,
It's fun to listen to that too. Like, there's a big aspect of poetry that's about recitation, right?
yeah, oh, absolutely. And many poets I mean, have you ever heard of a poetry slam? Which is
Yes, of
yes, which
course.
is great fun, right? I mean, that poem, I believe that was written in 1924. So, that's been popular with children. I hope it's still popular with children for a long time. But Canada's had its own poets laureate, and we have Dennis Lee, who wrote wonderful books for children, including a poem. Now, I'm really hoping you'll tell me that you've heard this one before, particularly when you were a child, Jacob. I don't know if your
This
family
is
read to you.
embarrassing.
Are
I'm
you
gonna say no. I can't remember a single poem in my life.
okay? How about
But
this
go
one?
ahead.
All right. It's called Alligator Pie. No, doesn't ring a bell. Okay.
Or no.
Alligator pie. If I don't get some, I think I'm gonna die. Give away the green grass, give away the sky, but don't give away my alligator pie. Alligator stew. If I don't get some, I don't know what I'll do. Give away my furry hat, give away my shoe, but don't give away my alligator stew. Alligator soup, alligator soup. If I don't get some, I think I'm gonna droop. Give away my hockey stick, give away my hoop, but don't give away. Go
My
on.
alligator pie.
Soup, there you go.
What?
The
Sorry.
soup, hoop, you
My
gotta get the
oh,
rime right.
I screwed it up.
Yeah,
Oh, jeez.
and
This
that
is where
was
we're getting a
written
professional here. Oh my god, I can't even finish up a children's rhyme, a children's poem.
but that was written in 1974, and I know that people have recorded it as a song. I think they made a movie out of that silly thing. It's very,
Wow.
very popular, and, this is how people start loving poetry because you get children to finish the last line because 'cause they'll know what it is, and it's just fun. It's really,
Okay, you're making a very good case for poetry right now. But one of the most accessible forms of poetry is haiku.
Yes.
three stanzas with 5 syllables, 7 syllables, 5 syllables. Am I right?
That's right. Yep, that's exactly right. And there have been some variations on it. Um, it's a Japanese form, and so it's been translated the form into probably every language because it's not difficult to write, and it gives you a kind of a flash into the way someone is thinking. And the original Japanese haiku were written so that there was a kind of surprise in the last line, that it sort of makes you stop. It makes you think. I know somebody, a man in his 80s, who's probably written a haiku every week most of his life
Wow.
because that's what he does, but there are some extremely famous ones. One of the early writers of haiku was called Matsuo Basho, and here's I'll perhaps I can read one that you it might resonate with you before we go to ours. In the cicada's cry, no sign can foretell how soon it must die. That's one
How
haiku.
soon it must die.
Yeah, because
That's so bleak.
it's
Mm.
seasonal. And that's the other thing. Very often haiku express something about the season in which they are written.
Oh,
Um, so here's one by Shiki, another famous uh, poet of haiku. Consider me as one who loved poetry and persimmons. So you get the idea of a poet.
consider. Oh yeah.
Consider me as one who loved poetry and persimmons. So, you get the sense, okay, I'm this erudite person loving poetry, but I really like persimmons too, fruit. Um, so I think these are very, very typical, very short, and I think this may be the most famous haiku of all, the one that kids who are studying haiku learn. An old silent pond, a frog jumps into the pond. Splash! Silence again.
Correct me if I'm wrong here, and maybe this is a shallow analysis, but I find that it seems like a big part of the enjoyment of haikus is just the sound of them, the
Absolutely.
rhythm, the way it feels like it's something in your heart.
Yeah, and
Mm.
also, I think people like waiting for that last line. What's it going to do? Is it going to fit the rest of the first 2 lines? Will it just continue them, or will it leap out and take you into another sense? So that if you've got that frog, you've got a silent frog, or a silent pond, I should say, and then the frog jumps into the pond, and then silence again. So you have,
Hmm.
that sort of juxtaposition of silence and the splash. I think that, it sort of, crystallizes an image, I think.
You challenged producer Ramya and I to
I
write a
did.
family themed haiku. What's the inspiration behind that?
Well, the Canadian League of Poets has deemed family as the theme for Poetry Month, April being Poetry Month. And
Mm.
I thought, okay, let's see what we can do with that. The three of us. Can we come up with our own haiku
Okay. Do you have
with
one?
family? I have.
Okay.
Um,
Ramya wrote one. I wrote one, and
Excellent. Let's
the,
hear yours.
you want to hear mine?
Yes.
Connected to all, but especially to them. They're all right, I guess.
I like it.
I
Oh, that's
wrote that 30
great.
minutes ago before recording because
Well,
I
then you've
totally
got
missed
the
the assignment.
feel. You got the feel. I
I want
love
to hear
that.
yours.
Okay, mine, I've been watching far too much news, and, tearing my hair and feeling awful about what's happening in the world, but her family ate dinner each night at 7 when there was food.
When there was food.
Yeah.
Oh, geez. You don't think that often of when there isn't food. At least in Canada, we're doing pretty all
Yeah.
right.
Yeah.
Makes you wonder about the fleeting nature of things. Geez,
That's right.
Danielle.
Sorry. Yeah, I mean, I watch stuff from war zones quite often, and you can see the women who are struggling to feed their families, and it's shocking, and you can
It
see
is.
very, very ordinary families are struggling terribly around the world, and through no fault of their own. They're still trying to get dinner on the table at 7 o'clock at night, and sometimes there's just no food with which to do it.
And sometimes it's hard to express the way that we're feeling, and that's when poetry comes into the question.
Thank you, Jacob. See?
I'm getting converted here.
Thank you.
Ramya, our producer, also wrote one. Can I read it?
Oh, good. Yes, please.
Here it is. With quick pricks we break, but find pieces in the years to retrace our ties.
Very nice.
With
Very
quick
nice.
pricks we break, but find pieces in the years to retrace our ties. The way I'm interpreting this one, and she's not here to correct us, but it's that sometimes, faults and fissures can develop between us and our family members, but we will always have that tie between us.
Yeah.
You always end up going back and finding things to remind you of your family ties. That's my interpretation, anyways.
Yeah, and I like the sounds. Quick pricks we break. With quick pricks we break. I think, yeah, people are careless of one another's um, sensitivities, and we say things that can be very mean, like a quick prick, and it can break your relationship. But the relationship is at base stronger than that. We can find ways to mend. I think that's a beautiful poem too. You should get
It,
full marks for you both.
and to use the word prick brings up like
Yeah,
images of like being like needled by a needle, which is a
yeah,
very uncomfortable image, but that's what family family tension feels like.
isn't
It's
it?
it's deeply uncomfortable because it's familial.
Yes, that's right, and I think that a lot of poetry has been written about, relationships, and, how relationships are broken in many different ways, including by death, so there are many funereal type poems. I don't know if you saw a movie many years ago called Three Weddings and a Funeral. It was extremely popular, I think you might be a bit on the young side to have seen it as a fully formed adult.
No, I haven't seen it. Fully formed.
But, a lot of people truly loved it, and there is a funeral, as the title promises, and a very famous poem by W.H. Auden is read out at the funeral, and I mean, this poem has been used at funerals all along, but I think since that film came out, it's probably used more and more, and I don't know if you want me to read it
I'd
or
love to hear it.
if it's
Yes,
a
I'd love
little
to
bit
hear it.
on the sad side, because it is. Um, it's called Funeral Blues, which gives you a tells you a little bit
Mm.
about why it's read, but it is one of the most beloved poems. Stop all the clocks, cut off the telephone, prevent the dog from barking with a juicy bone, silence the pianos, and with muffled drum bring out the coffin, let the mourners come. Let aeroplanes circle moaning overhead, scribbling on the sky the message he is dead. Put crape bows round the white necks of the public doves. Let the traffic policemen wear black cotton gloves. He was my north, my south, my east and west, my working week and my Sunday rest, my noon, my midnight, my talk, my song. I thought that love would last forever. I was wrong. The stars are not wanted now. Put out every one. Pack up the moon and dismantle the sun. Pour away the ocean and sweep up the wood. For nothing now can ever come to any good.
The moaning sound of an airplane. You didn't need to use the word moaning, but
Yeah.
in
I
this
mean,
context, makes
you
sense, right?
you really get the deepest sense of grief in my view from this poem. I think that Auden, um, it's about his lover, who died, obviously,
Mm.
but, I think that it expresses so much more than that. I think that we've really, when people hear it, a lot of people burst into tears when they hear it, and that's one of the things that poetry can do. It can express an emotion but it can also help us to discover an emotion that we have been feeling. And another reason for me to love poetry is that sometimes if you feel a little stuck and you find the poem that actually helps to express how you're feeling at that time, it can help you feel somewhat less stuck.
People often talk about when they have an important conversation and somebody tells them something that really does it for them. It's like, I just heard the right thing at the right time. There's the right words at the right time. And I think what poetry is the right words that's available at any time.
Yeah. Did you have to memorize poetry when you were in school or when you were a kid at all? Did that ever was that ever a so for some people it was absolutely a dreaded thing to have to do, and for other people it was their very favorite thing to do.
No, I didn't have to do that once in my life, I don't think,
Really?
but I was in the French public Ontario school system.
Ah.
So
So
we
not
have
even
different
French
values.
poetry? Oh.
Please. I think the
Well,
closest thing I came to memorizing was like prayers from the Bible.
right. Okay. Well, that's poetry as well, isn't
Yeah,
it?
I suppose so.
When I was in high school, we had to find a poem that was, very that we could memorize, and I, at that time, was going to school in the United States, and Robert Frost, I believe, was the poet laureate at the time of the
Mm,
United States and wrote many famous poems. One of the stories about him was that he, at the inauguration of John F. Kennedy, um, read one of his most famous poems. He was fairly elderly by then, and he forgot the words. He wasn't reading it, he was actually reciting it, but the whole audience knew it and they finished it for him, which I found
wow.
deeply moving because it was, I think you may have heard the poem that starts with, "Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though." And that was, this it's called "Stopping by the Woods on a Snowy Evening." The poem that I
Mm,
had chosen to memorize is one that is used at graduations constantly, and do we have a moment for me to read it to you? It's quite short.
please, I'd love to hear it.
It's called "The
Mm,
Road Not Taken," and my guess is you may have heard this at some point. This was written by Robert Frost. "Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler, long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other, as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear, though as for that the passing there had worn them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves, no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere, ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference."
I can see why people would read that at a graduation ceremony.
Yes.
That's a beautiful way of expressing that in life you always make decisions, and those decisions have um consequences that you can't foresee. I think we can all look back at our lives and say, like, that one moment in your life that you said yes to something actually ended up dictating like a huge part of your life, like 10 years down the line.
Yeah.
And life is just a giant series of decisions that you can't really go
As
back on.
way leads to way. That's right. You take one
As
road
way leads to way.
not knowing
Hmm.
where you'll turn next. And I considering that was written in 1916, it's still pretty live, isn't it?
Wow. Danielle, you gave us this assignment to write a haiku about family, and
Yes.
I misunderstood the announcement, the assignment
Oh
as
no.
just write a poem, period. And so I did end up writing a haiku about family, but only like 30 minutes before I had to read it. But I tried really hard to write a poem, and I'd like to read it for you,
Oh yes,
and
please.
I'd love for you to critique it. Um, there is context behind this. Would you like me to give it to you before or afterwards?
How about after?
Okay, so this is called circadian. If dawn never came, would you never wake? If dusk never fell, would you never sleep? Hypnotized is what we are, not just you and me, all of society. So acquiesced are we that we've built an entire society around the mesmerizing pendulum swinging its way across the sky. Find me a farmer that tills his soil at 1 a.m. Find me a banker that writes up loans at 2 a.m. Find me a nightclub open at 10 a.m. I'll wait, but hurry up, please. The drugstore down the street is closing in 30 minutes, and I desperately need lavender oil. Can't sleep without it. See, millions of years ago, the boss came up with policies dictating that we are not to do certain things at certain times, like visiting the drugstore at 3 a.m. That time is strictly reserved for sleeping activities. How dare you not slumber at the designated time? The boss growls. The sun is the boss, chairman, king, president, and CEO, and he's an implacable bastard. 9 to 5 isn't just an HR creation. It's a biological, extremely long distance cosmic relationship. And I, for one, have fallen out of love. I've been given no choice but to call it off. All for the better, I suppose. Workplace relationships can be so messy. My eyes are closed now, permanently cutting off the light that all this time kept me in sync with the schedule of Humanity Incorporated. Sleep comes when it comes, star be damned, need be damned. I do not wake when the dawn comes. I do not sleep after dusk falls.
Oh, very fine.
I wrote this because I've lost my remaining vision in the past 2 years to the point where I don't have any light perception anymore. And a consequence of that is that your day and night cycle gets all out of whack. Your circadian rhythm isn't in tune with when the sun is up and when it's down, and it causes sleeping issues where you're not naturally tired when the sun is down and awake when the sun is up. And it's kind of messed me up in a way that feels almost like poetic, because it's like now I'm like out of sync with everybody else that's in sync with the sun. This like cosmic long distance relationship. And that's the way that I've seen it. It feels like a breakup with the sun, like a sun that's no longer relevant to me.
Jacob, that's wonderful. I think you need to write more of this stuff. And this is an experience that many people can't won't know about unless you do keep writing about it. Um, I think it's very important. I know that there have been psychological experiments of keeping people, fully sighted people, in total darkness, and they discover that their circadian rhythm changes completely. That um,
Wow.
that their day seems to be it shifts all over the place, but instead of being a 24-hour day, it's like a 26 or a 28-hour day, um, because the body just does what the body does. And
Right.
I think that for people to know that there are people who are living without an automatic response to sunlight. For example, there's an argument right now about if we go to a system where we no longer shift the clocks for daylight savings time and then back from it, which should we keep? Should we keep the daylight savings time all year round, or should we keep standard time all year round? Well, I think you have something to say here.
Poetry is one of those things that lets you express difficult emotions, difficult feelings about topics that can be pretty niche. And I want to thank you for bringing this to my attention, because I had a lot of fun writing this poem at your prompting. It got me thinking in ways that I don't think I would have had the opportunity to otherwise. And I hope that this convinced some listeners that poetry is actually a lot more accessible than it seems. Danielle, thank you so much.
Thank you, Jacob.
That was Danielle McLaughlin. She's a regular contributor to AMI Audiobook Review and a huge poetry fan. We have her on once a month. That's all the time we have for today's edition of AMI Audiobook Review. AMI Audiobook Review airs weekends at 1 p.m. Eastern on AMI Audio and repeats every 6 hours. We're also available on all the big podcasting platforms, and that includes YouTube. You can send us feedback emails at audiobookraview@ami.ca. That's audiobookraview@ami.ca. And you can follow us on Instagram at AMI Audiobook Review. That's at AMI Audiobook Review to follow us on Instagram. I'm Jacob Szymanski. Happy listening.